Hello, literate programmers. My name is John Kulas. I'm a 20-year professor of industrial and organizational psychology, 11-year user of R for statistical operations, but for the last 8 or 9 years, I've also been using R within literate programming applications. So, not just doing analyses, but writing about those analyses as well. And so every week I hang out and with some people who collaborate on these projects. They occasionally stop by as well. Um, but I frame this as using R for authoring, and that's a little bit of a misstatement, I guess. A couple weeks ago we talked about lying, but lying intentionally with purpose for learning. Um, but so it's not R that we're using to write. We're using R as an analytical platform within the narration that we actually do. And the primary platform that we've been using, Quarto, doesn't really care if we use R or something else to script our analyses. And so we haven't really talked about it, but as we're progressing along the alphabet here from A up through I, and then this week we got to J, thought it might be an appropriate time to look into some of these other options. So the other option we're going to look at tonight in terms of really literate programming, which is just including narration with your code. That's the way I'm defining it. It's defined differently, of course, by different people and in different disciplines. My discipline, psychology, it's not a phrase that's well adopted within psychology yet. Hopefully, one of the reasons we're here every week is to promote that and see if maybe we can give that a little juice. So, anyway, so the platform that we've been using called Quarto, they primarily we've been using Quarto, but the authors of Quarto explicitly mention not just R as a way to facilitate the analytical portion of your document, but they talk about Python. That's always been another popular language. But Julia is something that Quarto and other platforms have been referencing and talking about. So we're going to take a look tonight. We have some guests here, not the typical guests, but we have some alien guests and the terrestrial creatures that are probably going to be most impacted by those alien guests. That's because two things really. So we're going to test out another environment within which to execute some of these projects, and that's called Jupyter or JupyterLabs. We're going to install that and take a look at that tonight. Because this is so fresh and so new, and I'm not an expert in these, I'm just going to be coming at these new, like everyone else. We'll probably split this up into 2 weeks. I'm guessing tonight we'll just take a look at installation and see if we can access these things, and then next week we'll see how we can leverage them to create reports and documents and things like we've been doing weekly here for the last 99 weeks. Apparently, if I look at the number there, it says ooh session. And if that's appropriate, if that's accurate, we've been doing this for 99 weeks. But our guests here, they're actually acknowledging that we're going to be looking at this new environment called Jupyter. But also today, coincidentally, today is there's a word for this, and I'm a huge astronomer. I'm not a huge. I'm a fairly big astronomy buff, so I should know the word. But there's an alignment with 3I Atlas, our interstellar visitor, the third interstellar visitor that we've tracked currently. So Atlas is exactly behind the sun right now. So whatever gravitation, there's supposed to be some gravitational impact of that. It's just astronomical alignment. And like I said, there's some word, it's like conjunction or something like that. I'm not sure the actual word. But might as well make one up because we're learning a new language tonight anyway, so I can pretend like I know the language just like I pretend I know the word that explains the alignment of 3I Atlas with the sun and with us. Now, my understanding is it's not exactly behind the sun, because even it's on roughly the same ecliptical plane, it's not exactly the same. So if we were able to see past the sun, we might actually still be able to see 3I Atlas. But if you've ever looked into the sun, you understand that it's very difficult to see anything. Don't look into the sun. Not a good idea. Unless you really need to sneeze, And then, even then, only like 20% of the population has that photic sneeze reflex. So just don't look in the sun. So our main purpose here is to promote this general idea of literate programming, which again is just including code and narration in the same location. So not popping around from a word processor to an analytical tool. Just do it all within the same platform. And so if there's anyone that stumbles across this and has any sorts of questions about how to do this, how do I get started? Oh, how to get started. So I'm going to try to start doing this. I put a little clipped video that we made a few months ago about how to get started if you stumble across one of these and it seems like we're kind of halfway through, or the content we're covering is maybe a little more intermediate than you were looking for. That how to get started video hopefully will help. But we're here if people have questions. I'll try to keep an eye on the comments. Feel free to drop them in there. And that always takes priority. And I would love to be able to, just like when I was a full-time professor, be able to kind of collectively help people on their issues, on their problems, on whatever it is they're trying to do. I kind of miss that part of being a real professor, a full-time professor. That was always fun. I always enjoyed that. So we're here for shared problem solving, but in the absence of that happening, we're taking a look at these focal issues. And as I mentioned, we've also been choosing those focal issues based on a rather arbitrary convention, but we've chosen to just go through the alphabet. And so last week we were up to I, this week we're on J. And so as we're looking at focal topics or issues, starting with the letter J, seemed to me like this was a good time to kind of take a look and see what Julia is really all about. Now, I didn't intend to also, initially, I just thought we were going to do Julia. But the more I looked into it, the more it seems like there may be a better integration of Julia within a different text editing environment. And so we'll explore that tonight by looking at Jupyter. And Jupyter, I guess a little bit of a preview. So if you come from a background like mine, you probably have an association of Jupyter with the Python language. That was my understanding and kind of the way I was thinking about Jupyter. Turns out Jupyter is more expansive than that. And so Jupyter can mean many different things. And there's a global umbrella movement called the Jupyter Project. I think it's called the Jupyter Project. And the Jupyter Project has all kinds of stuff going on. It really is kind of astronomically large. Sorry, cows, if I scared you cows there. But the two of the products that the Jupyter Project makes is our text editing environments. One's called Jupyter Notebook, and the other more recent one is called JupyterLab. And JupyterLab is kind of the current evolution of Jupyter Notebook. So we'll revisit this and we'll take a look at that. But that's all a long-winded way of saying that tonight's focus is going to be on Julia, a little bit of what it is and maybe what some of its capabilities are. And then we'll see if we can install that. And then we'll also install JupyterLab. We'll take a look at Jupyter, the project, as well. I don't think we're going to get very far tonight in terms of leveraging Julia and Jupyter toward the creation of stuff like what we've been making. So one of the things that we make are these slides. You're looking at the slides, and there's a link to the slides in addition to the link to the How to Get Started video. There's a link to this week's slides, and there's embedded resources throughout. There aren't great visual cues on those embedded resources, so you just got to kind of play with the slides. Sometimes I do images, oftentimes I do text. Depending on the text, if the text looks like it's already been formatted, you're not going to get great visual cues there. But they're there for other people more so than me. I enjoy making them, but hopefully other people find the resources helpful as well. So anyway, we'll probably spend most of our time tonight not trying to create a product like this through Julia or Jupyter, but we're just going to get them installed. We'll take a 10,000 foot perspective view on what these things are or what I'm conceptualizing them. as a psychologist who historically has worked with R, the language, through R Studio, the environment that I choose to interact with R within. And so this is going to be different. It's going to be a different language. It's going to be a different environment. So the different language is Julia and the different environment is Jupyter. So we're going to go slow with it. Again, one of the reasons we're going slow with it is this is new to me as well. So I've been using R and R Studio and these authoring platforms for almost 10 years and using them almost daily. And we've tried a few different things at a few different points in time. Let's come back to that. So before we give our kind of setting the groundwork on Julia and Jupyter, let's actually take a look and see what happened last week. Because the way in which these weekly sessions are structured, it's exploratory, it's open-ended, it's not scripted. The metaphor is an academic office hour, just the doors open, whatever's on your mind, come on in, we can figure it out. I love that, and I want to try to recreate that, but it's not always the best for learning, and it's not intended to really be the best for learning right there in terms of condensed bits of knowledge or information. So every week, at the beginning of the week, we spend about 20 to 30 minutes covering what happened last week in a manner that's more typical for learning. So in terms of tutorials, these aren't intended to be tutorials, except for the first 20 or 30 minutes or so. You can probably conceptualize those as being kind of workshop-like. This is how you do something, or this is a condensed presentation of a topic. All right, so let's get our transition here into what happened last week.
Last time, you remember, our heroes had charged down a secret passageway in the old Bleakley mansion following a 6-foot metal-munching mouse. Then, coming upon a closed door, Bullwinkle had tried to put his ear to it to hear what was going on, and promptly got his head stuck. Suddenly, the door was thrown open, and Bullwinkle was pulled into the room. And through the open door, Rocky saw a sight that made him blanch with fright.
Hokey smoke! The room's full of mice, and every one of them is 6 feet high.
In a trice, our heroes were seized and hustled by the enormous rodents into a large hall.
Where do you suppose we're going, Rock?
They must be taking us to their leader. Look!
Yes, there on the wall was a framed portrait.
Our leader, the Big Cheese.
Now, where have I seen that face before?
Didn't there used to be a club on the TV that...
No, that was somebody else.
The ears look familiar, though.
But just then a curtain parted at the end of the room.
I had to write that, so I didn't listen very carefully to the narrator on that segue when I cut up that little clip. But he said two phrases that I love, and I'm going to have to try to work into my everyday kind of conversations. My friends are going to love me for that. But I had to write them down here. So, Rocky blanched with fright. So that is such a nice way of saying kind of turned white as a ghost, or was white with fright. Blanched with fright. I love that. And then he also said in a trice. Oh, I love those old English type phrases and sayings. I wish they hadn't have gone from our lexicon and got replaced by wonderful things like 6-7. So, shouldn't say that. They're not mutually exclusive. I'm sure 6-7 didn't replace anything other than what the heck are you talking about? So, okay. So last week, whoops, I'm on the wrong slide here. If you access this week's slides, I disabled the background that you're actually seeing, and I disabled that because they're just more distracting. There's a lot going on here, isn't there? There's UFOs, there's scared cows. One of the cows apparently has myopia and is hungry, maybe an eating disorder. But there's also these blobs going on in the background. The blobs, we played with these last week and thought they were pretty neat, but they are a little distracting. So we'll go over those in just a second. So last week we did a full session on iframes. And if I highlight this here, it's going to be a little easier to see. On the left here in the typical tab, you see a complete specification that I used in this week's slides to access last week's slides. So last week's slides, the scripting components that are important there are the source and then the URL where that source is hosted. Now, this is the same URL that I post weekly in the comments. It's still up there, and I leave them up there, and Posit hasn't yet come knocking on my door and said, hey, Kulas, you quit spamming us with your stuff, and please get rid of some of it. Eventually, they might, I'm guessing. But this is straight HTML code, and so this iframes are something that are going to be used in HTML products only. We only really played with the height and width specification, but if you follow the hyperlink, the title is one big hyperlink. So if you follow that hyperlink, I guess we can do it. It'll show you some modifiers and some what are called attributes that can be applied to the iframe itself, and you see that a couple of them we used width, and we used height. Now width is going to be relative to the container that you actually have, and so we like using the percent unit in the width specification because that's gonna. So one of the things that this iframe does is it really interferes with. There's JavaScript behind it, and there's also JavaScript controlling the advancement and the progression and just kind of the display of these slides. They're interfering with each other. So some of my functionality that I would typically want to work on is not working. So for example, my F key isn't working. I should be able to go to tools and get that, but some of my keyboard shortcuts that I do typically rely on are not operational. Now that also applies to advancing. So I'm not going to be able to advance my slides the same way that you are if you access them as given the URL on the comments. But what we actually have here with this width 100 and then height 380, you got to kind of just play with that depending on how things are displayed. And so that can blow up on you if someone is on a different type of reader, if someone's on a phone or a smaller device. I'm not sure about, I'm not sure about whatchamacallem, pads. ThinkPads? What the heck are those called? I've never had one. I'm not sure what they're called, but I know they're very popular with the kids, as we say. Now these slides are fully functional, and the cross references are all operative. Everything works great. There's going to be potentially some formatting issues here based on that are dependent on who developed these things. And so one of the kind of unforeseen consequences of being trained as a quantitative analyst or quantitatively oriented person, but trying to apply those quantitative skills within a literate programming application. So that is trying to do presentation and styling and formatting of words and text and images in addition to the quantitative stuff. I'm a hack. So there's stuff that there's stuff that I'm doing that I'm sure a programmer and a web designer in particular from 1997 would probably roll their eyes about. So one of the things I'm looking at, for example, are these eyeglasses in the corner. And I know that I kind of hacked the size of those. And so the images that I have, the locations of the images, the sizing of the images, I know I'm not specifying those in a way that's best practice. And so the expectation is with iframes, you might actually get a little different look there. Let me pull up just in a browser that URL and see if I can kind of show what's going on. What's going on here? I think I pasted it in the wrong spot. What is happening? Huh. This is weird, not what I expected. I'm not sure why that's not taking me there. There's apparently something in that URL that wasn't being read well. But you can, if you look at this image, it looks to me like these glasses in particular are a lot smaller relative. Sorry. Let's get rid of the cows here for a second. These glasses in the lower right corner, those are a hyperlink to my GitHub repository where I keep all the files that are used to create these slides. And if anyone wants to replicate them or get any ideas about how to make their own slides, you're free to do so. To me, those glasses look smaller just because I've spent so much time on these slides when I put them together. And so if I pull up the iframe, yeah, does that not look larger relative to the rest of the information to you good people out there? Anyway, so that's just one of the things that, again, that might be a little more prevalent on the iframes than is prevalent on the slides as displayed fully within a browser. Anyway, so sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit on that. So that was iframes, and that's the typical way iframes are used, is just to embed something else. And since we've been using slide presentations, we thought we might as well slide that. You can embed an entire website. You can embed images. You can embed moving images. And so one of the things that we took a look at last week was a quarto function, and again, let me highlight these so it's a little easier to see. But the quarto function that you can use, and we did use, and is being used on the slide that you're looking at, is, I'm going to highlight that, and it's just called background iframe. And so background iframe you use adjacent to the title of your slide, and the curly bracket specification, you just say what the source is that you're interested in presenting as a background. Now, instead of using a website as a background, you can also, there's a package that someone developed, and so that package is going to be accessible via this repository hyperlink that we actually have here. So there's a finite number of examples on the repository. There's also a description there of how to create your own background if you like what you're seeing here. If you like what you're seeing here, go and get yourself a lava lamp, because that would probably give you hours of joy. I don't know who sells lava lamps anymore, but the internet, of course, is a retailer for all of us. So I'm sure you can find a lava lamp. So there's a limited number of examples there. There's this, what you were looking at, it's called meatballs. It's one. But with those, there are going to be JavaScript files, and those JavaScript files, I don't know JavaScript, but I looked at the files, and at least the ones that I looked at seemed pretty easily and straightforward to edit. So for example, we'll take a look at one of them here. So for example, there is a example background of, there's our meatballs, Tetris. This is one that I didn't look at, but it's one that probably reflects the editable nature of it that I'm talking about. So if we download, whoa, it's kind of cool. I didn't realize that. It's interactive, so it does something different based on what your cursor is doing. So if we were to actually access those files and take a look at them within the JavaScript file itself, there's going to be, let's see if we can open this in, it's not going to let me. There's going to be a folder with all kinds of different hex icons in it. So one of the easy ways you can edit this is just to modify this. You can take out some that you don't like. You can put in new ones that you do like. The JavaScript, we could open this within our studio if you wanted to. It reads them fine. But you can probably get a good sense of the editability by just looking at that folder with the images in it. And go ahead and add some more images, and then you can display what you want to display, or take out images if you don't like some of them. So that repository was neat and pretty easy to use. It does require, it's a little different than the quarto function. The quarto function, as specified, is assuming that you're going to pull something from a hosted site. that's accessible, for example, with an internet connection. And that's probably how most people are going to use iframes. That's how I used them on the previous tab with the previous week's slide deck. But you don't need to do that. So you can also just say where is the file that I'm interested in. Now the file that you're interested in for the repository is going to actually call on other necessary files, and so it's a little more complex, but it's an option. So if you really want to make your own customizable background and have it be moving around, you can actually do that. There's a third way that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about last week, but I do this all the time. So I just use a GIF. So I use a moving image as a standard image. So if you just treat it as a standard image by using that exclamation point, square bracket, parentheses convention, on an HTML product, it'll display the moving GIF. Now, in addition to just displaying that in whatever dimensions you want to, you can expand that to the entire screen width as well. And so the way that I typically do that is not through the background iframe function, but I actually do that through the background image function. So background image, this works fine with GIFs. I use it all the time. And so a couple of different ways to actually kind of have the same effect within your slide presentations. Now, again, I did tell you that there's going to be some interrupting of the functionality if you go ahead and use that repository information. And so you're seeing that a little bit with me having difficulty navigate around here. So today, and this you actually see on this slide, this is just me using that background image and finding a GIF of the planet Jupiter. And so the little Muppet lady in front of it, apparently her name's Julia. I haven't seen Sesame Street for a number of years now. Characters apparently have changed. I'm sure they're not all still alive anymore. Mr. Hooper, I'm guessing, is not. People probably don't even remember who that is, but I'm guessing he's not around anymore. Sorry, rip Mr. Hooper. But this is Julia, and Julia's standing in front of Jupiter. And so today, and so going back to last slide, the Jupiter GIF that you see, the specification of that is just background image within my slide deck. We can look at that really quickly here. Let's see if I see where it is. There it is. So it's on line 110. And again, I almost hesitate to show some of these codes, and the scripting is always available if anyone wants it. But my hesitation with this is only that it can look just verbose and wordy and a little intimidating if you're looking at it and you didn't craft it. And I recognize that. There's a lot of stuff here, but really there's only a very long address here for the GIF. So the rest of this specification is just the title. It's a first level title, and just have it say today with 3 dots. And then as a background image, go ahead and put in that GIF. And that's all. That's one way to actually, as long as you find a GIF that you're interested in using, that's one easy way to get that kind of background image. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is if you're picky about your backgrounds, you may want a little more control and specification over the GIF. Now, this looks like, Jupiter's being filmed here by someone with Vaseline on the telescope or something. It's a little blurry. It's not crisp. It's not the crispest, sharpest of images. We forgot our cows and UFOs. There they are. I was feeling kind of lonely, so I feel better now. So iframes are great. You can use them for backgrounds. You don't need to use them for backgrounds. If you have a GIF that you want, you can also just use that background image specification. I do it all the time. And so, again, the other caveat there is iframes are going to be reserved for application within HTML type products. And the slides that you're looking at these are HTML slides. That's how they're meant to be interpreted and viewed and used. So tonight, continuing on our ABCs of just kind of features of these authoring capabilities, we're going to take a look at Julia. So now Julia is a language. It's an open source programming language, just like R is. Julia, I believe, did a little bit of research into this week because I know nothing about it. So if I'm going to talk for an hour, I should probably at least look up what it is. And so it sounds like this was created, at least in part. I thought I had a different hyperlink there. Next week, I'll try to get a different hyperlink in terms of the genesis of Julia. But it sounds like Julia was developed, at least in part, by people at MIT. So the Massachusetts Institute of Tamales. So in addition to making tamales there in Boston, they also apparently work on programming languages. And Julia is something that excites people who know a lot more about these products and processes than I do. And so in 2022, there's a presentation here already talking about incorporating Julia within Quarto, or creating these reproducible and publication ready is kind of a phrase you hear frequently with Quarto. So publication ready things using Quarto, but also powering the quantitative or analytical components with Julia. And so the background I'm coming from is R, and learning R as an analytical tool to do straightforward things like correlations and histograms and box plots and ANOVAs and regressions. People from different disciplines might have more exposure to Python than they do R. Now, people from not as many backgrounds have exposure or interest or kind of access to Julia, and Julia is a completely new language. Apparently, there's some development kind of and programming capabilities and characteristics that make Julia something that really gets people kind of interested and excited about it. The word performative is used quite a bit, and performative, I think they just mean efficient in terms of processing needs and the way in which the language is interpreted and written and executed. So Julia, and again, apologies that I don't have, I guess we probably should do, let's just do a good old Google search on Julia, the language. Let's see if we can actually, so this is kind of what I was hoping I had a hyperlink to. Here's your high performance, kind of the fast and kind of one of the design features that apparently is characteristic of this. It is a language, so it's a language, and again, there are some different applications here that you can see that are intended to be used with this. It does seem to be a growing community. They do have their own convention. I'm not sure how long they've actually been using or been having those conventions. It looks like there's some compatibility, backwards compatibility with different languages, and there certainly is some forward compatibility considerations in terms of who might be interested in adopting this and using it. And it really does seem like the people that know more about pulling all this together than I certainly do, who are working kind of under the hood of these products more so than as a front-end user. So I'm a front-end user, not a back-end developer on this stuff. But they seem to be interested in using and leveraging Julia quite a bit. So anyway, so my exposure to it is just someone who has been using Quarto, and as I use help pages and resources authored by Quarto, frequently coming across reference to Julia. And so this is just straight off quarto.org, and very early on in terms of kind of introduction to what this platform does. First, again, if we conceptualize literate programming as the combination of narrative and code, you see those two elements are the first two elements they talk about in the Quarto guide. So the narrative is the authoring component, and the code is the computations component, is how I would characterize that. And again, it's important to acknowledge here as we're taking a look at this other computational potential engine, and I'm probably using that word engine incorrectly, so I'll try to be careful about that. So, but as we consider, or as we take into consideration these other languages that we might want to leverage, it's important to note that Quarto has absolutely no affiliation or association with one of them primarily. So this is very obviously kind of a design choice by Posit, the company that has developed and continues to develop and support Quarto. They want to be agnostic to the language that's actually used, including languages that have not yet been discovered, invented, or proposed. But there's some common ones that they expect that people are going to be wanting to apply. And so Python and R, again, are probably the two big that have a very long, strong history now within academic applications, and individuals who were trained formally in academic applications going out and applying what they've learned in practical applications. So Python and R are very well known, very well integrated, very well supported within any sort of data oriented application. Julia, again, this is something that's new to me. I believe that there's some association with the Massachusetts Institute of, what did I say? Tacos? MIT, but it's still being currently supported and developed. So it's still in early development. The version that we see is 1 point something or other. Python, I believe, is on 3 something. R is on 3 something, and these languages have so much current support for them. It's just impressive, because these are all open source languages. These aren't, there's no company, well, there are companies that are peripheral to these languages, but there's no company that's directly benefiting from the development and support of these languages themselves. So yeah, you can see why a company like Posit, that's a public benefit corporation, that's provided something like Quarto, might be interested in aligning themselves with these open source languages as well. So Julia is what we're going to take a look at tonight. Now, I did, in my kind of looking for how to use Julia within Quarto to make nice publication ready documents, I went to a couple of different resources, and one of them I went to was AI. I went to Grok. Now Grok's been hallucinating a little bit with me, so I've learned that you have to be very, very careful with how you frame questions to Grok. So the prompt framing, got to be really, really careful with, which is, I think the confusing part about that is the way that Grok is marketed is more of a kind of conversational, we'll pick up on mannerisms and idioms and things like that. But I've found that it's very literal. So I've found that you got to be careful with how you kind of frame things. So anyway, I should have put the prompt here as well, but this is not the prompt. This is just the answer. So Grok said that yes, you can use RStudio to work with Julia and Quarto, but you probably should use Jupyter. And so that's how Jupyter became kind of an addition to this week's topic. So when I took a look at, when I saw that and heard that, I was like, okay, well, that's funny because it wants me to use a Python IDE, which is in my head, I had associated Jupyter with Python, the language Python. And for a long time, RStudio was associated with R in my head. I'm not saying this is how things needed to work. This is not the alignment that was intended necessarily by the developers. But in my experience with people I know who use Python, people that use R, that was kind of the way that the world was structured. R people used RStudio and Python people used Jupyter or a different IDE. Now, when I used Python, and I've had to use it a couple of different, had the opportunity to use it a couple of different times. When machine learning first kind of became a well-publicized or better known kind of analytical approach within psychology, this was probably seven years ago or so, 6 or 7 years ago, I would say. The documentation for applying machine learning kind of strategies toward data sets was almost universally Python based. And so as we were trying to learn some machine learning techniques and try to apply them in novel and interesting ways, we were finding that it was easiest for us to do so by using Python instead of R. Now, this was the first time I really started considering a language different than R to do something that I wanted to do as an industrial psychologist. The IDE that I used at that point in time was one called Spider, and I'm not even sure if Spider still exists, but Spider, to me, doing a little bit of research in terms of how I want to interact with Python, Spider to me was an interface that was comfortably similar to RStudio. It had a 4-pane alignment. It had an environment, I'm guessing the console scripting environment. And that was something that I was drawn to, so I used Spider. The other people that I was working with, however, almost all of them used Jupyter. And so Jupyter Notebook, I believe, was the way in which they were interfacing with Jupyter. And so Jupyter, as I mentioned earlier, Jupyter, even though I'm associating Jupyter in my head with Python because people that I knew that were using Python tended to work, or some of them at least worked within Jupyter, or that was the equivalent to my RStudio, was they kept saying Jupyter, Jupyter, Jupyter. Well, it turns out that, and there's an acknowledgement on this page too, so there's a link to this. I think this is a helpful hyperlink in this week's slides. It just says Jupyter can mean a lot of things, and I think that was part of the confusion in my head. But there is this project Jupyter, but then there's these products as well. And so the product that we're going to talk about tonight and load, and sorry, I'm talking a lot tonight, but we're going to get to it. So we're going to install JupyterLab. And JupyterLab is a notebook editor. And so notebooks are consistent with our weekly focus on reproducible research via literate programming principles. And again, it simply means narration and code in the same spot. These notebooks, however, are going to have a different orientation, purpose, and feel than the markdown or the R markdown and the Quarto type documents that we've been focusing on over the course of 100 sessions here. So the Quarto focus is on publication ready documents, really nice, really slick looking output. Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Notebook, so the notebooks themselves, their focus seems to be more on interactivity. Their focus seems to be on reproducibility in terms of sharing with other researchers, more so perhaps than an end audience in terms of a consumer audience. And that's my personal way of kind of interpreting what I see as differences. And it's there's obviously bias in that in terms of me saying that, but that's kind of a simplified way that I would look at the difference between a notebook and something like a QMD or a Quarto-based kind of project. So what I think we'll do tonight is we're going to actually install JupyterLab, and we'll install Julia, and then we'll make sure that they're installed. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll see if we can actually leverage Julia through Jupyter to author a Quarto-based document. And now you might be asking why. So, Kulas, why are you going to subject yourself to all of that kind of pain? It's because we can, I guess, and because we're on the letter J. So what else are we going to look at with J? Jumping jelly beans? I mean, this is there. This is all over the Quarto specification. This is all over the Quarto documentation. So we might as well see if we can inform ourselves a little bit with at least what these things mean and what they are. Julia is a language. Jupyter is a project, but it's also, we can think of it as an environment facilitating the creation and specification and writing of code alongside narration. They don't seem to want to use the phrase IDE or interactive development environment, and I'm not sure why that is, but I think we can conceptualize it essentially as similar to RStudio or Positron. The other thing, I guess, is JupyterLab. There is, as we talk about these languages, especially Python, and I'm guessing Julia, it's important to note that there are people using these for software development and for other applications other than data science. And so as a psychologist, as someone who has a lot of experience in an academic setting, I guess it's something that is good to actually recognize, that these different IDEs may be tailored for different actual purposes. And I never really thought of it, but RStudio and Positron definitely are kind of tailored toward data scientists. And JupyterLab is also tailored toward data scientists. And so that is definitely something that over the course of the last week, kind of doing some deep digging exploration into what these are, what they mean, how do I use them, the data science aspect of all of this stuff, not the language, Julia, but certainly the application, the Jupyter project, the data science orientation of that really came through loud and strong and loud. The other thing I guess we can say is, before we download it, is Jupyter itself is, even though I had associated it with Python, the name Jupyter comes from 3 languages. It's actually an amalgamation of Julia, Python, and R. So Jupyter comes from Julia, Python, and R. And so this has been an ongoing project since, I believe, the early 2010s. So the original notebooky type idea was through a program called IPython, and IPython grew into something called Jupyter Notebook, and Jupyter Notebook is now something called JupyterLab. And of course there's differences there. Jupyter Notebook still exists. My understanding is it's not going to be supported into perpetuity. JupyterLab seems to have kind of surpassed it in terms of, or has encompassed it in terms of its capabilities and then expanded its capabilities. So I guess I won't speak out of turn there, but I don't get the impression that JupyterLab has any sort of limitations on it that can be performed in Jupyter Notebook but can't be performed in JupyterLab. Once we get into JupyterLab, we're going to see that the extension on the notebooks themselves it's probably important to acknowledge some of this history, because the extension on the notebooks themselves kind of reflects that history. So we're going to see an IPYNB file format, and that's something that is frequent to see when referencing Python. Really what it is it's referencing IPython and notebooks, and the notebook type file within within Jupyter that might actually be produced. So it's a way of sharing notebooks. So those IPYNB files are ways of sharing notebooks with other researchers, and the naming convention seems to come from the history of this Jupyter project where IPython was the original kind of interface. Now, this has other consequences because we're going to see that in order to use these different languages, that I convention seems to have stuck. So there's an IPython, there's an iJulia, there's an IR, and Jupyter supports, they said, hundreds of languages, so that I don't know if the I convention continues for all of them or not. Okay, so that's a lot of talking for someone that doesn't really know a lot about the subject. So let's see if we can get at least JupyterLab installed. Now, there's a couple of different ways to install it. The easiest way, I didn't do it on this, actually I didn't do it on either computer. So I have a laptop here just in case the install goes wonky tonight. But I didn't install it. What I did install was Python. Now Python I had on this computer because, as I mentioned, that I have actually had reason to use Python previously. So Python is on this computer. What I did recently was I updated that Python to the most recent version. So this 3.14 is the most recent version of Python. And I think that that's going to be something, even though we're not talking about Python tonight or next week, I think you are going to want to install Python on your computer in order to install JupyterLab. And that has to do with this pip command. So pip is a package manager and a package installer for Python applications. And so pip is something that we should be able to access JupyterLab through. And so I think we're going to try that. So make sure to install Python. So let's just, again, I already have it installed. But there should be a typical kind of go through the Windows install manager. Whoops, shouldn't have done that. But it gave me information here in my downloads. I probably should have gone to the downloads tab first, and it says Python 3.14. That's the same version that I actually have installed. So if you click on that, that's going to be the executable file that you want. And that'll walk you through, if you're on a Windows-based machine, that'll walk you through the steps necessary in order to install Python locally on your machine. If you install it, you should actually have this pip capability that comes with Python itself. So my recommendation is to go ahead and install Python. And then within Python itself, we should be able to install JupyterLab. And again, we're using the Python package manager here. And so I do not know if these first commands are going to be necessary, but let's try it. So I'm going to just look for my command prompt. Now, if this works, what we're going to see is JupyterLab open up in a browser window. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can interact with JupyterLab. There's a GitHub-based application that uses VS Code, but it says it's JupyterLab. There are desktop applications. There's virtual-based kind of applications and interfaces. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to actually use the local Python install. I'm going to navigate to a location that has some other information in it, and
I know I know how to navigate a little bit through the command prompt from from computer camp. So when I was in 5th grade, I went to a computer camp and I got to learn how to code a little bit in BASIC and a little bit in Fortran. And I still remember just kind of some of the navigation aspects there. So I'm just looking for a directory that I can put stuff in that I don't really see one that I like here. So maybe we'll just put it in the culos directory off of the C root. Now this pip should work once Python is installed. It shouldn't matter where I am. I should be able to access this from any command prompt, any directory. And there's like no way this is going to work, is there? But we'll try it. I'm going to try without the Python prefix on this first, because I have seen other people who look like they know what they're doing do this install without the py. So we've either just entered the matrix or something is working here. It's still thinking. It looks like it's going to go for a little. Oh, it's going a little faster now. There should actually be a way to check here too to make sure that this came in correctly. So let's actually do this install. I don't know that we're gonna. I don't think we're gonna use matplot or plotly. We don't need to worry about packages. We're not going to use Python for the normal applications. I think we can just say JupyterLab. The hello is going to open up one of those notebooks that I was mentioning. So IPy and then notebook. I don't think we actually need that. I don't know if that is anything. Let's take a look at this. Oh, they want you to download that. I think we'll do this next week. This isn't something we need to do tonight. I think there's enough content here tonight. Just working with something that is so foreign to what we normally do that we'll just see if we can actually do this. So I'm going to try just typing JupyterLab. Let's see if we have access to it. There we go. Wow, look at that. Okay, so and it's pulling up the information in my coolest directory, which is kind of what I was hoping for, because I wanted to know if we can look at some of these files. Now, I have letters of recommendation here. I don't think I can pull those up, but I also have images. We can pull those up. Okay. I should be able to go within these directories as well. Okay, neat. So we now have JupyterLab. I am going to open up a notebook. One of the things that I got a real quick sense of looking through tutorials on JupyterLab is that it relies a lot on shortcut keys. So you're not expected to use the mouse to go around and ask for stuff. There are shortcut keys for just about everything. Now, what you're looking at here is called a cell. This cell is being kind of controlled by Python, and Python is what I had previously installed on the computer, so we should be able to type Python code in here and then execute it. Look at that. We should be able to make assignments. Now the assignment operator in Python is different. All right. The execute shortcut key is kind of nice because it's this. So there are some, and I've never played with this before. So this is just me kind of interacting with this for the first time. So what I did see on a tutorial was that some of the shortcut keys that are recommended that you work with are actually shared across Jupyter and RStudio. So what I just did there, what I just did there was I used Control Enter, and Control Enter is kind of the run this line command within RStudio. It looks like it's also operative. It's also operative within these notebooks. What you're looking at is a notebook. I can add a markdown cell if I wanted to, and it should take the same kind of information that we use in Quarto as well. Now, previewing that's something that we're going to have to actually look at. So if I just run it. So just running it gives you a preview. Okay, cool. Now this is the kind of information, again, this is intended to be different than how we're using these literate programming principles via Quarto. And via Quarto, we're authoring a document from front to back, from top to bottom. It's not intended to be interactive. It's intended to be, once the code is written, the code is there. And so this stuff, you can go in and you can actually change it. So 2 minus, I'm getting really elaborate here, aren't I? So you can go in there and change it. You can also see some feedback that we're getting in terms of the cell itself has information in it that isn't fully executed at this point. And you're getting that orange feedback. So orange and blue, they're obviously aware of red and green colorblind kind of user issues. That I think is fairly consistent with these open source projects. Okay, so that's Python. So that is Python, but that's Python via JupyterLab. So what we're looking at here is a notebook within JupyterLab. And so we should also be able to open up a QMD within JupyterLab. But we're running this via Python. And within JupyterLab, the way that we specify the language that we're interested in is through these kernels. And so you see, I mentioned earlier IPy versus iJulia versus IR. There's different kernels that need to be loaded in order to use them and execute them within this environment itself. Okay, so we got JupyterLab loaded. We didn't quite get to Julia. Sorry about that. I wanted to get both of those loaded tonight. But I think, give me a week to play with this a little bit and play with the environment. I know that the preferred way to interact with this is not to use click with the mouse, but I think we probably will be using click with the mouse just to make the learning curve a little easier as we're operating here within JupyterLab. So this is really neat. I'm really kind of liking the layout of this, how it actually looks, just straight out of the box. Accessing it via Python was not bad at all. So you don't have to use the command prompt. Using the command prompt, honestly, even from someone who, even though this looks like we're in the matrix here, Oh, the other thing about being interactive is there's probably going to be a timeout in these. So this is just going live right now. This is operative. This is something that's working. We should be able to see that here on the left-hand pane. It tells me there's a Python 3 kernel that's currently working. There's an open tab, which is just this. If I close it, it's gone. The kernel is the kernel's gone as well now. Kernel is just, I probably shouldn't say, again, I shouldn't speak out of turn, but a kernel seems to be the active operative engine within the notebook. And you can have multiple notebooks actually open. Okay, so next week what we'll do is we'll recap this, just the installation of JupyterLab. We'll play a little bit with some Python code, and then we'll install Julia, which we didn't get to tonight. Maybe we can do a very quick Julia install. Just so we don't have to do it next week. Again, there's a lot of language here that even someone who has some level of experience with this stuff, it is a little intimidating because this is under the hood stuff. So I'm looking for, where do I install Julia? And again, they're going to want, I wonder if we can do, let's just try a Julia downloads manually. And we'll see if this gets us what we want. Now, one thing I know that if we go this route, so instead of going the command prompt route, there might be an option to pip Julia as well. Sure, I'll install it there. You do want to create this. I know that this is just generally true for this type of software that's going to be used across these different IDEs. We're going to want to make sure that we can find it. So this add to path is a good idea. I don't know that we need a desktop shortcut. Start menu, sure, we can leave that. At least that'll give us some comfort to know that it's actually there. And then we should also need to then make Julia, make it known that it's on our system, I think is something that we need to do. So let's do a quick look at that. This is just saying installation. Okay, I think we'll just see if we can get it installed. And let me do a quick, well, let's run it and see if it actually works. Now, these things are all, I mean, R, Julia, and Python are all essentially just calculators. Huh, okay. So, I don't know. I don't know Julia. I know Julia, but I don't know Julia the language. And Julia the person I have not spoken with in a while. But it's taking the same values and operators that Python actually did. I wonder if we can do an arrow in here. And again, it doesn't like that. Okay, so it's assigning to an object, but it's recognized that object. But a little different than Python and R is it's also showing me the value of that object when I'm not asking for the value of that object. Okay, so the JupyterLab install, easily facilitated if you first have Python installed on your local machine, open a command prompt and typed whatever I typed. I'll I'll make sure to recap it next week. Interface is pretty cool. What we will need to do next week. So next week we'll definitely have a follow-up session, and we'll see if we can actually we'll see if we can actually connect Julia to JupyterLab such that we can initialize it as a kernel to power the book itself. Okay. Again, thanks for bearing with. We're kind of venturing into unknown territories here. Again, this is way far afield of the normal focus of these weekly sessions, which is just let's write something using literate programming principles. And if it's got to be quantitative, we'll use R. Let's see what some of these other capabilities are. And so we have Julia downloaded. Right now, it's just a big computer. We have Python downloaded. Right now, it's also a big computer, but at least we can write markdown with it. And next week, we'll get Julia to be recognized at least within JupyterLab. I think we can also get it recognized within our studio. I know how to do that the same way we can recognize R, or the same way we can recognize Python. That's through the reticulate package. We've done that for a long time. I know there's a package where we can do the same within R or RStudio. But again, using Quarto is going to be different. So using Quarto, I think next week what we'll try to do is we'll try to render Quarto documents from within Jupyter notebooks, but using the Julia engine. And we'll see if we can mix it up as well. We'll probably also try RStudio. It's not supposed to be maximized for that, but we'll see if we can kind of force it. And then we might go to Positron as well. So Positron I still have loaded on this computer, and that should be fairly well optimized toward using Julia as the computational engine as we author these Quarto documents. All right, so thanks for bearing with tonight. This is definitely new stuff, and definitely we're learning as we go here. So next week should be fun. Next week should be interesting. Now that I have both of these loaded locally, I think I feel as though I can go ahead and play with them a little bit and not feel guilty about these weekly sessions, which are intended to kind of show people some of the struggles of learning this stuff for the first time. So I'll play with it, and next week should be fun, should be interesting. Might be a little bit of a stretch in terms of our skills, but that's okay. That's how you learn, right? All right. Thanks for bearing with, and see you next week.